Today the carburettor repair kit arrived for the cb125. So we have lots of nice new shiny bits and pieces. I've been told with some confidence by a chap I know who restores motorbikes that a lot of the components in this should be avoided, in particular the main needle, which he says is made for a generic series of motorbikes and tend to be pretty bad. But to be fair, I'm not entirely sure how much of this kit I'm actually going to use. I'm definitely going to use the gaskets, some of the O-rings, springs, and possibly some of the brass parts, but we'll see when we get into it. I'd like to use as much of the original parts as I possibly can. I'm going to use the original needle as it seems to be in good condition. The needle's retained by that weird shaped clip. Okay, inside the barrel there is a little guide post that marries up with this slot in the side of it. I'm going to drop that in. Actually, before I do that, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think I need to put the main jet in. The main jet is two parts. You've got a main body that drops into the slot and screws down some of the way. And then on top of that there is a smaller jet. I'm just checking it's clear. It is. I know it's clear, I've been through it and checked already. I don't think these need doing up hard. I think they just need sort of tweaking into place. As they're brass, they're going to be quite soft. Once that's in, we can then drop this into place. That feels nice and smooth. Ordinarily the cable would go in at this point. The original gasket is made of what feels like pure rubber, although it is quite hard and stiff now. This one feels like rubber with like a fabric material between it, slightly different. But I don't see any reason why it shouldn't do the job properly. This is quite supple. The next bit is to do battle with the choke mechanism. Now I've got to try and remember the technique I used to reassemble this. That drops to the bottom. Then I use my magnet and I lower this down into the cavity. I think we might have it. There we go, bit of a fiddle. Was that 3 attempts, maybe 4 attempts? But it's just a case of being patient. Let's get the lever in and lock all that into place, and then we can hopefully forget about the choke mechanism. So if I remember, it was the lever. On the lever was a rubber bush. There we go, and that's locked in place. So we now have a lever engaged with the choke mechanism, and then it was the top hat. I might put a bit of grease on that. Followed by a metal washer, followed by a lock washer, followed by the nut. Now that that's in place, I can get back to putting the needle and slider back in, and there is an orientation. Nice and smooth, followed by the spring, followed by the top cap, which sits in this ring here. Now ordinarily this would have a cable going through it attached to the slider, but obviously that will have to be done at a later date. Being very mindful not to cross thread this top bit. There we go. So that is the slider in place. Is free to travel. Yeah, under spring tension. The next bit is the needle and seat, and I'm going to start by reusing the original needle and seat. It cleaned up really well, and the needle itself, being original, looks very clean. There's no wear on the tip that I can ascertain, and the spring at the back is nice and free now that it's had a bath in the ultrasonic cleaner. Right, I've got a new needle and seat with a new washer, but I'm going to leave that sealed in its packet in case this one fails. I think I'm going to reuse the old washer, which looks to be made of a fibrous material. This seems to be in good condition, so if I just torque it down gently, it should be enough to stop it leaking. That's the needle in. Right, one more jet. Okay, after a final check that this was clear, I'm going to fit the idle jet circuit, or the idle jet I should say. I did compare it to the new one in the kit, and they look pretty darn identical. And I'm half tempted to use the new one, but I thought, you know what, we'll go and use the original Honda built one. If we have any issues in the future, we know we've got a set to pull back on, but as these are clean, I see no reason why not to use them. That screws in nicely. There we go. So that's that jet in. And I've been umming and ahhing over this bit for a little while, is to fit the idle speed adjuster needle and the fuel mixture needle. For example, the end of the idle speed adjustment screw is quite rusty, and it just looks a bit unsightly, so that is an easy decision to switch that out for a brass one, which should just make it look a bit neater. So that should neaten that up a little bit. So this particular screw was 2.5 turns from fully in. So I'm going to set that now. That's half, 1.5. So that's where we found the needle. And again, with the mixture screw, I think I'm going to use the new brass one, as the old one's a little bit pitted. Not that I think it'll make any difference whatsoever, but it, if nothing else, will look a little bit nicer. This one was wound out 1.25 turns from fully in. So that's fully in. So that's half, 1.25. So that at least gives us a starting point. The next job will be the needle and the float. We know the needle's good, or at least we think the needle's good, so that should drop into its seat. The floats are facing that way, and what I need to remember is which way in this pin went. That's the fat end, that's the thin end. So it slides in that way. Doesn't slide in that way, so that must be the direction it goes in. Okay, I think that just needs to be gently tapped down into place. Maybe enough just to tap it down into place, nice and gentle. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure if the floats are set up correctly. I have not adjusted them in any way, so I'm hoping that they're sort of factory settings. I will consult the manual a bit later on and just check to see what the setup procedure is, but for now I am just doing an assembly job. I think the next part of the puzzle will be fitting the gasket, which is ever so slightly different to the gasket that came out of here. I don't know if I've got that knocking about somewhere. By different, I don't actually mean different. Again, it's just this one's made out of like a pure rubber, which has become hard and inflexible. This one's made out of a softer fabric impregnated rubber, or rubber impregnated fabric. So next, actually I'll tell you what's missing, and that's the bail itself. But we know it goes that way, which means that the bail has to go on that way. Perhaps I should have done this earlier. Just got a bit of spring tension. It falls in place. It drops in there. And this should just... God, it's got quite a lot of spring tension in this. There we go. Clip into place. Lovely. And that leaves this. So we've got a replacement O-ring in the service kit. There we go. That's that on. Just pinch that up. Get rid of the grease. Brilliant. And I think that just leaves the new O-ring, which I'm not sure I should leave in there because I have a feeling that's going to go missing. We have a working choke function, although this lever will come off to be replaced at some point. We have the carburettor mechanism, which I can't adjust. We have the slider mechanism, but the spring tension is quite strong, so I can't really move it. And yeah, I think it looks a lot nicer than it did before it got the clean. It's not perfect. The ultrasonic cleaner did a pretty good job, but any sort of patination that kind of ended up being etched into the finish over years of neglect are left there. But yeah, I'm pleased with that. I may just work and try and get some of this sort of tar resin or whatever that's oozed onto this off, but I don't know. How far do you go with these things? A friend of mine pointed out, and rightfully so, that for about 12 quid I could have bought a brand new carburettor off eBay. As I'd never rebuilt a carburettor, I quite enjoyed the experience, and even though it was more expensive to rebuild this one than it was to buy a replacement, it'll be very satisfying to see if it works or not. And if all else fails, we can go down the cheap carburettor route.